Good evening, hello, and welcome. You're watching NewsX, and I am Meenakshi Upreti. Now, as far as COVID is concerned, we are all worried about the third wave. Now, that's a variant which everyone is talking about. There are many variants, mutants of COVID-19, which have kept all of us really worried. And when it comes to really the third wave, how powerful it will be, how different it will be from the second wave. To talk about all that and more, I have an expert, someone really who's an authority on the same. I have Dr. Samiran Panda. He's the head of ICMR epidemiology. Also, he's a top scientist there. Thank you, sir, for talking to NewsX. So, my first question, far as the third wave is concerned, sir, now everyone really wants to know, in layman's terms, is it going to hit us? When is it going to hit us? If at all it does hit us, help us understand really, sir, what it means for the layman. You have said earlier, far as the third wave is concerned, the third wave could take its own time. The third wave could hit us later. There are early indications of the third wave. Has it already come? Is it already here, sir?
All right. Thank you, Meenakshi, for getting me on the show. And if we talk about third wave, let's ask this question: is it a possibility? Is it really going to happen? The short answer to this is yes. Of course, there is a possibility. And then naturally, when that becomes the answer or the response, one frequently comes back with the next question, which is, well, if the third wave is going to come, how big is it going to be in terms of the height of the wave? Because waves are always thought in terms of their heights. However, before discussing that, I must tell you that third wave coming to India is a question which should probably be broken down to smaller questions. So each state should ask this question: is my state going to face the third wave? Why so? Because all the states of India are not in uniform state or stage of vulnerability. So that's the first thing we have to be able to appreciate. Second thing, which is very, very important, is that many states in India did not get affected by the second wave as was experienced by states like Delhi or Maharashtra. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that 80% of the recorded infections, symptomatic infections that happened within India was contributed by 10 states.
Yeah.
So all those 10 states had very severe second wave, which means that people got exposed, people there in those 10 states got infected and developed some form of immunity. So for those states, if one thinks or questions about the third wave, naturally the possibility of third wave hitting strong in those 10 states is very, very low. Moreover, these states not only experienced very intense second wave, but they had vaccine introduction, and vaccine also got into speed, vaccination program. So we have to, first of all, appreciate that states do differ from each other. So it makes much more sense if we ask that, is every state going to face it? And if the answer is yes, is it going to be of similar intensity and spread in terms of spread across the states? That's one. So I would say that state level data should be analyzed in order to identify if third wave is going to come. For any state, if third wave arrives, it is dependent on the previous experiences with the first wave and the second wave and the vaccination. That's my second point. If the vaccination goes very well, a particular state, even if it faces third wave, because that state did not experience a very intense second wave, meaning there are people who are vulnerable, but they again will not see third wave in any great extent because there will be immunity acquired through vaccination. So we acquire immunity against COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 either through post natural infection or
Yes.
post-vaccination.
Right. So, sir, as you rightly mentioned, there are, of course, a large number of states where a large number of population had been infected. So, certainly they have antibodies. Vaccination drive in metropolitans really high. Let's break it down to states then. Talking about, say, Kerala, we are seeing about 60 to 70% cases every day emerging from Kerala. Would you say that in states like Kerala, the third wave has already come?
Very good question, Meenakshi, from public health perspective. So, before going straight to the question, let us also take into account the national, fourth round of serological survey, which had representations from various states, and Kerala was one of the states.
Yeah.
And there, we realized that around 40%, if I'm not wrong, it was 44% positivity, meaning 44% of the individuals in Kerala, particularly in those districts which participated in the fourth round of national serological survey, had presence of antibody, meaning they had exposure to infection and they got infected and they developed antibodies. So the other side of this data is that 56% were not exposed. So why? Because Kerala was probably successful in containing the infection during the second wave.
Right.
So we are not surprised that Kerala is now experiencing, surge of infection. So of course Kerala is experiencing surges of infection, and
But that surge of infection mean that the third wave is there? That's the question which is really bothering all of us.
yeah. So in order to figure that out, one has to really sit down with the state specific, which is Kerala, here we are discussing, and see whether the second wave was coming down, as we call it, descending arm of a wave. And from the descending arm, if there is an upsurge, that should certainly be considered as an early indication. But one needs to really look into the state-specific data, because if there was no descending arm, so it was almost like it was going up, and now we are seeing farther going up, so it's continuation of the second wave. So in order to differentiate, one has to really graphically see things.
Okay, so you say there are early indications of the third wave which are emerging, of course, in states like Kerala, and you said the states which have better, vaccination, more people vaccinated, are at a lower risk of the third wave. Which state would you say, sir, are at a higher risk of entering the third wave before maybe metropolitans or perhaps just by themselves?
So this is again another very, very important question. So infections might happen even after vaccination, but those infections will not push you or me, if we are vaccinated, to the severe state of the disease. So in a particular state, if the vaccination has attained good coverage, then people will still get infected if they do not observe COVID-appropriate behavior. So the point I'm trying to underline here is that the vaccinations or the vaccines which are being used against COVID-19 in India, they are not infection-preventing vaccines at all. They are disease-modifying vaccines. So symptomatic diseases or people who require hospitalization or ventilators or oxygen or even unfortunate events of deaths would be very, very less in those states where the prioritized and eligible groups have been covered well with the vaccines, and at least around 50 to 60% of the people have been vaccinated. If that is the case, we should not expect seeing symptomatic or severely symptomatic cases happening during the third wave.
So there are two questions coming to my mind from your answer. One, of course, about precautions. We have festive season coming up. I'll take a question on that. But before that, a very direct question. Earlier, there were reports that a third wave could emerge by August 10. It was inevitable. Would you say a timeline tentative, maybe by September, and are we expecting a third wave? Or would you say it's not inevitable, which you have said before as well?
Again, another important public health question, Meenakshi. The whole issue is about what are we doing if we create a situation where population density gets increased. We need not to wait till the puja season or Christmas. The virus doesn't recognize Eid or puja, Dasera or Christmas. Virus doesn't know all this. Virus needs an opportunity. And what is that opportunity? The opportunity is susceptible people coming in contact with the infected individuals and in a situation where the population density is very high. So as we saw, if you remember, I'm sure you do, that a couple of weeks ago, there was a huge surge of tourists going to Himachal Pradesh.
Yeah.
Kulu and Manali.
And then we saw a big rise in the number of cases, right? So, sir, are you saying?
That's
I'm going to interrupt you here, sir. So, are you saying, because we have festive season coming up, Ganesh Chaturthi, we know that many states have allowed smaller processions. Of course, they're not going to be at the stage which they were earlier. Very few states have actually banned it. There also a lot of politics is happening. I want to discuss politics with you. But do you expect, sir, now with the festive season coming in, because you rightly mentioned Kulu Manali, tourists going there in throngs, and we saw cases go up. It was post-Holi as well. So, do you expect maybe post this festive season, cases could go up and we could experience third wave like we did in the second wave?
Whether it would reach the height as we saw in the second wave, if that is the question, I would still expect the height of the third wave to be lower than the second wave, because during second wave we did not have vaccination happening by an extent that has happened now. So third wave is a possibility during Ganesh Chaturthi or the tourism or due to other festive seasons. If the population density goes up and if the COVID appropriate behavior is not adhered to, of course there is a possibility. But now we should not forget that our health should be in our hands. So whatever religious leaders say or other, popular figures say,
absolutely, sir.
Yeah.
But sir, with the rising numbers, would you still say, as you have said in the past, that the third wave is not inevitable? We can still reverse the trend. Yes, we can reduce the numbers, but with the numbers going up every day, and in some states, of course, way ahead of others, is it still not inevitable?
So recorded number of infections and recorded number of symptomatic infections where more people are going to the hospitals requiring oxygen are two different things. The second scenario, where the number of symptomatic advanced stage of the disease or symptomatic infections are going up and people are going and getting admitted to the hospital and requiring oxygen, that's a scenario which we do not want. And that is exactly the picture of a wave. And that wave, none of us wants to have again, because we saw.
But is it possible to avoid it?
Yes, it is very much possible.
In all the states, you're saying?
So each and every state, because health is a state subject. So if state health authorities are serious about it, for example, Himachal Pradesh, forget about it, we did talk about it in terms of tourism, but Uttarakhand, they actually took a step whether they wanted to have this Kanwar Jatra or not. And Kanwar Jatra, so that was a very, very smart move. So each state needs to look into the epidemiology of infection that the state experienced during the first and second wave, and then take a call. And it is possible to avoid based on these local state-specific data analysis or even district-specific data analysis.
Right, and you say, sir, you speak of Uttarakhand, and we heard, of course, of another variant emerging there. Then we have another C1.2, of course, for the layman, of course, it wouldn't make much sense, but we are hearing that this variant could be really dangerous. Many reports also suggest that it's the vaccines may not be as effective on it. Is there any real danger of it spreading to India? If yes, what could it mean for us, sir?
Meenakshi, very important question. I would say two things. While Delta was spreading, we actually looked into the laboratory experiment data at the ICMR, National Institute of Virology in Pune, and we realized that the new variants, be it Alpha, Beta, Delta, they were all getting neutralized by the sera collected from vaccine recipients. So that was a good thing.
Yeah.
About the new variant, which is being reported from African countries and other parts of the world, we need to have a surveillance. So surveillance could happen at three levels. One, at the international airports, if travelers from those countries where this new variant has been reported from, there the surveillance should happen. Second, the surveillance at the state level. And then third, the surveillance at the district level. And I can tell you that as yet, we have not recorded this new variant, number one. Any new variant does not necessarily require or merit consideration as variant of concern. And most of the variants, when newly identified, are called variant of interest, or in brief, VOI, or variant under investigation. So variant of interest or
but
variant
are they still at VOI or is it a VOC, a variant of interest or a variant of concern for us? Since there are no cases, I believe it should be VOI.
Right now, so far India is concerned, it has not made an entry, number one. Number two, if clustering of infections happens, people get severely symptomatic due to the new variant, and then deaths also get reported. All these are phenomena which would consider, calling it as a variant of concern. So as yet, we should maintain a vigil, very strong vigil, and INSACOG is the mechanism there, and NCDC, the National Center for Disease Control, is the focal institution or agency in order to ensure that the surveillance, I'm talking about genomic surveillance here.
Yes.
So we are talking about two different kinds of surveillance. One is genomic surveillance, in order to see whether the new variants are appearing or not, and other surveillance is clinico-epidemiological surveillance.
Right, but these variants, I believe, can escape the immunity as well, and they're not effective on vaccines at all also. Are you seeing any variant at all in India? There were many cases of Delta Plus also, which had been reported earlier. A few, not as many. What does this really mean for our country, sir?
I would tell you that any variant that gets recognized as a possible variant of concern, that needs to be examined first in the laboratory in terms of the serum collected from the vaccine recipient, and see whether the serum collected from the vaccine recipients are able to neutralize the new variant. So if they are neutralized, then we should be feeling okay. So in terms of Delta Plus, I'm not seeing a red herring there as yet, because we have Delta Plus has one more additional mutation happening over Delta, but the laboratory experiments or the evidence clearly shows that the vaccines which are being used in the vaccination program in India, which is Covaxin, Covishield, now Sputnik, so they are all able to handle this variant called Delta or Delta Plus. So we should not be panicked, but we should have a very close monitoring and vigil.
Right. And so, since we're talking of various mutations of COVID, let me bring you to another really basic question, which is really worrying people. We are speaking of third wave, a possible third wave, as you very rightly and interestingly mentioned, still not inevitable, but possible. And with the rising numbers, alarm bells are ringing, as you've said, sir. Is the third wave, if at all, God forbid it comes, is it going to be as effective as the second wave, or it will not be, considering we've seen a large number of cases in the second wave, immunity building, etc., which you've just spoken about, sir?
Very clearly, the third wave, should it occur, it would not be able to, that's what our modeling exercise shows, the modeling that we did from ICMR in collaboration with the Imperial College London, that the third wave would not be able to reach the height as we saw during the second wave, which is a good thing. But it should not again prompt us to lower our guards down, because vaccination doesn't prevent acquiring the infection or transmitting the infection. What vaccination does is modifying the disease. So along with vaccination, we should continue using masks so that we do not also cause transmission of the virus, because post-vaccination it is possible for us to getting infected, and we will not get to the severe stage of the disease, but from us, others could be infected, and that will be a good thing, I'm sure everyone appreciates.
And so, since we're speaking about, of course, how COVID spreads, of course, if we get into herds, and that's happening at one place, of course, with all the precautions, children, they are going to schools have reopened, and I did read a bunch of your interviews where you have back reopening of schools, which almost every expert has. But now in Tamil Nadu, interestingly, there were a very few cases, just 10 cases of students catching the infection post the reopening of schools. Nobody is saying that they caught it within the school, but they have also infected 3 teachers and, if I'm correct, 1 more staff of the school. Now, is there a fear that reopening of schools could increase the number of COVID cases, since children have better immunity, but they can be carriers, isn't it, sir?
You hit the nail right on its head, Meenakshi. You said that although children got it following school opening, but it was not sure whether they got it from the school or not. So that brings us again, or probably prompts us to look into the 4th round of National Serological Survey, where we did include children during the National Serological Survey who fell into the age bracket 6 to 17. And there we saw that 55% of the children were already exposed and infected because they had presence of antibody during the survey. So clearly, the children got exposed and infected, they had antibodies, and not that many symptomatic children came to the hospital. So what I would say, that before opening up the school or during opening up the school, the parents of the children should get vaccinated, fully vaccinated. The teachers should get their vaccines. The school support staff should get the vaccines. And moreover, we should also remember that preventing children from going to school are actually preventing them or robbing them of their life opportunities.
Right.
Children, the future, which will be evident 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line.
There are many who don't have tablets and have no access to internet, and we accept that point, sir. But since you also spoke of vaccination, and I know vaccination is not something you really dwell upon, but there were reports of a booster shot. Many countries have started it already. What do you think on it? Does India need a booster shot? Since of course you're working with various variants and you're looking at it in detail. Help us understand, sir. What do you think of this booster shot? Is there or could there possibly a need for the same?
I will say, Meenakshi, in India, we have turned out to be lucky to have Covaxin, which presents the whole variant, number one. Covishield, of course, we have. And many people before getting the vaccine or even after or in between 2 doses of vaccines have become infected as well. So many have actually received through the natural infection probably 3 exposures. So right now, it doesn't make public health sense at all to talk about booster dose because we want as many eligible and prioritized groups of Indians receiving 1 dose and preferably 2 doses.
But let's say they get both the doses then.
Yes.
Because I'm not going to talk of course, imaginary variants because they haven't come in yet. But with the existing variants, with the existing serological survey, do you see at all a need for booster shot later in the future when we have a sizable chunk of our population vaccinated, sir?
Right now, if you ask me, it is all dependent on the discussion revolves around the antibody titer or the neutralizing antibody titer coming down. But we must not forget that it's not just neutralizing antibody titer post-vaccination or post-infection which matters. There is another arm of the immunity which is called cell-mediated immunity, and we are not measuring that. So just thinking that neutralizing antibody titer is coming down, so we are again susceptible, that's not the right thinking because we have 2 arms of the immunity. So what I would say that let us not panic, let us get vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and then see what is the scientific data emerging is telling us. So right now for India, booster dose should not be a central discussion. We should rather be discussing about full vaccination.
All right, full vaccination. And so my last question, it's not even a question. I would really like you to make an appeal to the public since, we've really discussed in detail the 3rd wave, possibility of cases rising, and we've seen what had happened in the 2nd wave. What would you, in very short, sir, succinctly like to tell people or our viewers on the precaution, which we all know, how important the precautions are, considering we have the celebration time, festive season really around the corner, sir?
If we celebrate this year in a little low key, maybe we'll be able to celebrate much better in the coming years. So my appeal to everybody is don't embrace COVID-19, embrace your vaccination, get rid of vaccine hesitancy if you have any, but despite taking vaccines, continue observing COVID-appropriate behavior. And by doing so, we all together will be able to win this war against COVID-19 in India.
Absolutely, sir. And I think it's a very pertinent advice given really the time we are all living in. And I think you said the most important and key point, at least for me, as a journalist, of course, that a 3rd wave is inevitable. Many of us, many viewers who have been writing to us also were very concerned about this so-called upcoming 3rd wave. It's inevitable. As of course, Dr. Panda says, all of this in your hands. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you for watching the show. And a big thank you, Dr. Panda, for taking the time.
Thank you, Meenakshi. It was nice talking with you.
Thank you, sir.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.